Welcome to Tea and Teaching, the educational podcast you can listen to with a cup of tea. I'm Arthur Moore, and in this episode we are continuing our chat with Dominic and Yana all about child agency. This is part 2, so if you haven't listened to part 1, it's a good idea to pause this, go back and listen to the first episode. In this one, we are going to be talking all about what we can learn from Yana and Dominic's study and what it means for us as educators, and what, most importantly, what it means for us in our classrooms. So take a moment, get a cup of tea, and when we're back, we're talking with Yana and Dominic about child agency in part 2 of our child agency special. Welcome back to Tea and Teaching. We have got Dominic and Yana again back on Tea and Teaching. If you remember, in the last episode, we were talking all about child agency. And guess what? We're going to keep talking about child agency. So Yana, before we jump into kind of what you've seen in schools and some advice for kind of educators in general, do you want to give us a quick reminder of what we mean by child agency?
Sure. Thanks for having us again by popular demand, no doubt. So last time we spoke about children's agency, we gave our academic definition of children's agency, which was socially situated capacity to act, where we emphasized that the two important elements to children's agency are a sense of agency, so children's personal belief in being able to act independently, to make choices and to make a difference with their choices. But also the second important element is actual opportunities for children in the classroom, in the school, to exercise their agency. So we emphasize that both elements are very important when we care about children's agency in schools. We also spoke about our project and our key findings, which was that the national curriculum of England is quite restrictive in terms of children's agency, and we want that to change. And we also promised to talk about how even within the constraints of the national curriculum, it's possible for teachers in the classroom create opportunities for children to act independently, to make choices, and to become more and more agentic. And we left on that cliffhanger, which we hope raised some intrigue. This is where we will talk about how exactly it's possible.
Yeah, I'm speaking ahead of time, but I imagine I had a million messages from people being like, you can't leave it like that. Tell me what I should do. So that's why we're back, even though we're in the past and that's whatever. Dom, so as part of the study, you kind of went to schools and kind of saw this stuff going on. Were there any examples that jumped out of like, they are smashing it, like this is great, this is what we want?
Definitely. So the design of the research, we deliberately wanted to do in-depth work. We're still debating whether we call it ethnography or in-depth qualitative inquiry, but I don't suppose your listeners will be too excited by that discussion. But the point is that we worked with 3 very different schools in great depth. So it's a longitudinal study, 2 years in each school at the same time. And the diversity of the schools. So, for example, we had one school that was an independent primary school. We had one school that was a state school in a big city, in a city, and then another school that was an academy school. So we had a nice variation there. But one of these schools, we increasingly thought, this is amazing what they are managing to achieve in spite of the many constraints. And I want to say, before I give an example of what kind of kicks everything off in that school, when we met the head and the senior team and the teachers, it was clear this was an exciting place to be. This was a school that valued ideas and indeed valued research. So there were research active teachers there, like doing master's degrees. They were genuinely interested in ideas, evidence, but of course also the demands that are placed on schools to help children achieve. This school, every academic year, begins its approach by asking the children to bring something in, bring an object. And that object could literally be anything. And it doesn't matter if it's an expensive object or a very cheap object. That's not the point. The point is that the children choose an object that's meaningful to them. And then there's a session where the teachers work with the children to find out and ask the children what are the kind of things they'd like to learn in relation to these objects. And I'm cutting a long story short, and Yana will have more of the detail, but this is then molded by the teacher into programs of study. So now listeners might think, well, surely the moment the teacher starts molding it, then some children will not have their interests respected. Well, to the best of our knowledge, the teachers found ways so that every child who'd expressed an interest in learning about something in the half term or term did find in the end that their piece of the thing they're interested in was covered. It's amazing. Yana will maybe talk a little bit about this. This wasn't just that at the beginning of a term and then leave it and the agency's all done. This was then systematically molded into the lesson planning and the lesson design. And I'm going to stop for a moment and let Yana carry on, but we were absolutely bowled over. It was astonishing. And when we also, of course, this is a real school, you know, we had conversations where in our research, we did lots of recorded interviews. And I remember one with the senior team again, where they were getting anxious about an impending Ofsted inspection. And the latest buzz phrase had been deep dives. And the apocryphal stories, or maybe not so apocryphal stories about the deep dives were inspector goes into classroom, corners a child and says, when were the Romans in Britain? Oh, you couldn't answer that. Bad mark, you know. So and the school was so concerned about the changing requirements of Ofsted was that they appointed people who'd been through Ofsted experiences and so on to advise them on what would be the best way to play the game, if you like. And every school has to do that. If you set up a high stakes system, that anyone who is intelligent will try and game that system. But in spite of that, this extraordinary sense of children's agency, living, breathing, incredibly exciting. Wouldn't you say, Jan?
Yes, so I just wanted to add maybe quick little examples of how what kind of objects children brought and how those translated into the curriculum. So, for example, teachers told me, or in fact, children themselves told me that some of the objects it could be an empty plastic bottle, a Coca-Cola bottle. But then when you ask a child, what do you want to learn about this? It could be the impact of a fast food diet on people's health, or it could be how do we dispose plastic? What happens to the plastic or to the oceans when the plastic is thrown into the ocean? So it raised a lot of very meaningful questions, which could be by teachers linked with the core knowledge that the national curriculum requires teachers to teach and children to learn. So in all of those discussions, it was important for the teachers to have those long discussions with the children about what exactly they wanted to learn so that they could make connections with the requirements of the national curriculum. And when we spoke to the children, so the curriculum would be divided into 3 parts. So for each term, they would have a separate section. And when we were talking to the children, we would ask them, so are you learning about this thing that you wanted to learn about this term? And sometimes children would say, no, not this term, but I know that I'm going to learn about it next term. So, and that links back to the importance of a sense of agency in children. So they knew that their choices made a difference, maybe not immediately, not in this exact term, but later in the year they knew they would be learning, and that also that made them very respectful of other children's choices. So they would tell us, this term we're learning about something that my friend wanted to learn about, but next term we would learn about what I wanted to learn about. So it was also inspiring in children, that sense of almost camaraderie in learning and sharing learning experiences. So that was, like Dom said, was very, very impressive.
And also, that's reminded me, Yana, that coming back again a bit to the kind of school organizational level, that they're in a trust, a small trust, and while we were doing the research, the school took on another school within the trust and had some responsibility to support that school. I think it had previously a very difficult inspection and required improvement or similar. Now that school's socioeconomic catchment area was very different. The school that we've been working in is quite mixed, with a fairly wide spectrum of socioeconomic circumstances. The new school that had come on board was a much higher level of poverty in the area and so on. And this is really interesting because some people will kind of say, oh, well, it's all very well giving agency to one group of children, but you can't give it to this other group, say. Well, what was true was the approach was modified. New teachers were taking on some of these ideas and different pupil base. So it got modified again, but the core principles remained and were successful. And so that was really interesting as well. In a way, the school tested their own model of agency, and we were privileged to see how that unfolded as well.
I love that idea of bringing the object in and then that being incorporated. I can just see that in a classroom environment, and then someone's object comes up in one of the lessons and everyone's like, oh, it's your object. Like, and everyone's kind of, even if it's not their object, they're invested because it's their friends or their peers, thinking they know it means something to them. Now, I can absolutely see that kind of, especially in the primary setting, you can see, but I'm sure there's secondary listeners maybe saying like, oh, how maybe does this come to me? But in kind of your form time, I can see how that would be part of it, or within your house setup, if you've got a house system. No, really, really interesting. Was there any other examples that kind of stood out of moments where you were just like jaw dropping, that it's so creative, it's so brilliant what the school has done there? I don't know, Yana, if there was anything that stood out for you.
Yeah, we should talk about how the school structured their lesson time, what was specific about the way they designed their lessons, because that's children's day-to-day experience. They come into school, they have lessons back to back, and that this is where they may or may not be empowered to be agentic. And in this school, the way they structured their lessons is that every lesson would have 6 stations, 6 separate stations. Each station would be designed to help children develop a certain skill. And those skills would be progressive from less ambitious to more ambitious. So station 1 would be about understanding, where children would be just learning about new concepts. The second station would be about research and ICT. Children would be using laptops or iPads to do their own research around the topic. Third station would be collaboration and communication, where they would work together with their peers on the same theme. The next station would be application, where they would be given tasks that would encourage them to apply what they learned in more practical ways. And the final station, a critical skill station, where they would be encouraged to synthesize what they learned from different themes and topics and make connections between concepts. So that would be the highest skill level. And then there would be a focus table where the teacher would be present. So if at any point children struggled with some of the tasks, they could choose to have some time with the teacher at the focus table, where they would have more direct support from the teacher. And what was important is that children self-assessed, so they would choose which level of the skill and which specific station they wanted to work at on that specific day, that specific time. And that worked amazingly. What we were really impressed by is children's ability to self-assess. And when we asked them, why did you choose this specific station today, they would be able to get to reason. They would be able, it not just because, although that was sometimes part of the motivation, not just because their friends chose the station, but they also had a sense of where I'm at in my learning. So I've done the understanding, I've done research, I'm able to apply, now I'm ready to be challenged in terms of my critical skills. And what was also very inspiring and encouraging and left us feeling very hopeful about the children of today is that they wanted to challenge themselves. They wouldn't choose an easy station just to have an easy task or to get a good grade. Grading was not part of that system anyway. So it was really inspiring to see that children wanted to learn. They wanted to challenge themselves, and they would progress through the stations, because at some point, if a child is bored, they wouldn't spend more time at an easy station. They would want an extra challenge. So it was great to observe.
Can I come back to that just with a question from more my own kind of teaching experience, and I'm sure one that a lot of people share is sometimes, or I have found, maybe it was the environment or was working within or created, however you want to judge it. Like sometimes if I gave a child agency over like maybe what the difficulty of work they're going to choose, there would always be students who go like, I'm going to go for something I know isn't going to kind of challenge me because I know I can do it, whether because they just wanted to do something right, so they felt good, or whether they were just like, I don't want to do a challenge. What you were saying there, Yana, is like really, really awesome. But what do we do with agency for children who maybe like don't want to challenge themselves? I don't necessarily mean kind of in terms of grades. I just mean in terms of like anything. Like, is there a sense of sometimes we want to limit a child's agency so we as the teacher can kind of push them forward? Or any thoughts on that, or am I just talking gibberish?
I'll say one thing and then I'll pass to Dom because I'm sure he has something to say on this as well. But what we found in talking to children in our research is that children are much more afraid of being bored than challenged at school. And that's I think that I'll just leave it at that. So that's what that's my answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you, Jan. That's what we found. Of course, we haven't said much about the teachers' role in all of this. And the teachers, I mean, I can imagine some people thinking, well, the teacher just sits at the desk and puts their feet on it, metaphorically. But of course, it's not that at all. And that moment, Arthur, you've just described, that's where the teacher is crucial, where they use various ways to respect the child's genuine sense of their own learning, but maybe sometimes just say, look, I reckon you could do that. Go and give it a try. You know, if it really is, you know, too much for you, I'll help you, or you can step back a bit and then have another go another time. So, I think I agree with Yana that the bigger risk is not assuming that children can do things. And we have, I think, an education system that's full of deficit views of children and young people, absolutely rife in England. This is partly historical, patriarchal. It really is way beyond the time when it should be changed. It feels like in some ways we've gone back to the Victorian era of education. And I think we urgently need to move forward again in a lot of these things.
Is that because often in kind of, again, in all our experiences, I'm not talking about kind of the listeners wider, but like, I think sometimes we have been told, or we tell ourselves, that the kid won't like my lesson, so I have to do anything to make them enjoy learning. Whereas if like, we all know kids who absolutely love learning, but then sometimes we put them in a classroom setting and that love of learning disappears, or we don't see it. And maybe that's what you're talking about, Dom, if it's not kind of the student and kind of their agency to want to do better. It's more kind of, we are constraining them so they can't go out and kind of show all these kind of aspects that they have. Am I kind of interpreting that right?
Definitely. I think that also brings us into the realm of how might we assess children and young people's progress. And there have been, and we've been involved in some of this, you know, there are strong views, informed views suggesting that, I mean, you mentioned examinations earlier, and of course, there's plenty of those going on in primary schools. I think how do we find ways of assessing the things that pupils bring that sometimes we don't even know about? You know, those extraordinary experiences of life in their communities and homes that if they're allowed to shine, show us so much. And we need to find ways to capture that. And I think this is the other advantage of agency. What happens is you actually learn much more authentically about what children do and do not know. And it's an old adage, isn't it, that you learn by trial and error. Well, when are children allowed to fail? You know, when are they allowed to make an error and learn from it? Incredibly rarely, because everything is scaffolded to the nth degree. My favorite, worst example of this is, again, the teaching of writing, where children are promised repeatedly that once they've mastered the skills, then finally they'll get to write something they want to write. It never happens. In some ways, it doesn't even happen until they leave secondary school. So, and if they want to write, then so yeah, those are a few of my thoughts on that one.
No, I can definitely. I've heard those conversations. I'm thinking back to my own kind of experience of like, oh, once you can do this, don't worry, you can like you'll do something you enjoy. Oh, but before you do that, don't you just got to learn one more thing. And I'm fairly sure I've said it many times, unfortunately, in my maths teaching of saying something like, like, this is pointless, don't worry about it. But don't worry, if you go and do a maths degree, then you'll be able to do kind of whatever you want. And I put out somewhere someone who really likes maths. I think when we're talking about assessments, maybe we're talking about the difference between assessing a child's learning and doing an assessment of where they are at.
Yeah.
And sometimes maybe we use those words interchangeably, like we're doing an assessment, and that's not the same of having an assessment of where that child can keep improving. And some of the best teachers I've seen do that in the classroom. They are able to see how they can support a student to grow and to be better, whatever that's better at, without saying you need to do better to get 88% on this test. And then you need to get 89%. And then even when you get 100% on the test, that just tells me the test was too easy. You did an easy test. Like no child can ever win at a test unless you get about 9. I find 95 is about the perfect score on a test because they still get, everyone's a winner at that stage. Yana, was anything you kind of wanted to add to that conversation? Like, I like your point of like children are afraid of being bored. I really like that point.
Yeah, I also want to add, well, it relates to what you said about how teachers are always trying to make lessons more fun for children to engage more. What was distinctive about that lesson design that I described was that system was applied across all subjects, no matter English, math, geography, art. So that what that meant is that in the minds of the children, every subject was equal, and they were given a certain amount of choice and freedom in every subject. In other schools where this system was not applied, and the lesson design was more on a traditional side, top down, from teachers to children, what we found is that children had a very specific perception of subjects where they would divide subjects into important and fun, where important subjects would be English, math, everything you need to pass the test and to get into a secondary school or progress to higher education. Whereas the fun subjects, the fun would be art and music, where and when we explore this further, what we found is that, oh, the fun subjects are the ones where children are actually given much more freedom because there is much less pressure of assessment. And the teachers would confirm that, oh, of course, I'm able to give children choice in music or in art. I can tell them to draw what they want. It's fine. It won't affect their performance on the important subjects, the English and the math. Whereas English and math, by nature of those subjects, they had to be much more rigidly structured, which meant that no amount of choice, no meaningful amount of choice, would be given to children in the context of those lessons. And that was so detrimental, in our view, to children's perception of subjects as so them seeing certain subjects as not important. And if you're a child with a keen interest in music or in art, and you are taught to see those subjects as something that is not almost irrelevant to your life, and something that is just you can have fun in those subjects, but they're not the subject that will get you somewhere in life. So that is what we thought was very detrimental, and that relates directly to children's agency and how it's essential that in every subject children are given some amount of freedom and choice, so that those subjects are also seen as avenues for them to express themselves as persons.
And what you're saying there works both ways, doesn't it? It's not just it's saying to the student that PE is fun, but what it's also saying to them, and this is again from my background, it's saying stuff like maths can't be fun because maths is all about the assessment. And then we get into students who don't want to keep going with their maths and sciences because they perceive them to be unfun subjects, which has its own host of kind of issues it's got. Like, I work with students all the time who are saying like, oh, maths isn't fun. I'm being like, there's so much fun in maths because it's got all this structure. What I'm hearing from both of you, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is this is not, we're not discussing here like the teacher kind of making these subjects in kind of these rigid and take away child agency. It's about kind of the fact that they work within a system, which we're calling the curriculum or education system, that doesn't allow the agency to kind of flow through. And what you've both discussed there in both your examples of where teachers or schools or kind of a group of schools have found a way to create agency within the system, and they're the ones that kind of really stand out.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we'd have to say a system that's not helping them, helping more schools do this. I mean, one of the schools seemed to have grasped this for all sorts of reasons, but they were working against the grain to some degree. And it's not to say we haven't really had much time to talk about the other two schools, which there were examples in all the schools of agentic practices, children showing their agency, and for different reasons, the other two schools faced in some ways even more difficult constraints. So in one of the schools, for example, the perception was, and I think as far as we could tell it was true, the parents had a very strong view that these pupils needed to pass the required test to get into the best secondary school. And so, ironically, whereas the senior management in the school were rather keen to increase children's agency and there were some really lovely examples where they'd done that, they were having to mediate that pressure from the parents, or their perception of that pressure. So that, by the way, I think that was also an authority that ran the 11+, as I recall. So that was an added challenge. Yes, but
no. The discussion about the 11+ is maybe a different discussion for another day. So, like, coming back on that, like, Dom, like, so how did you see the school you were talking about where put agency at kind of the forefront of everything? Did they have a way of communicating to parents why they were doing that, or kind of when a parent came back and said, "No, I want my kid to only do test practice because they need to do well and their SATs in 11+," like how did you see them coming back to the parents being like? I can see that's a really awkward it's always an awkward conversation between school and parents.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think fortunately for that school, they were achieving well in all the necessary test outcomes.
Maybe exactly due to agency.
Yeah, well, I mean, and as I said earlier, that same school which had taken on another school that was started off in a worse place, that other school, their results went up as well. So there's no evidence that giving children more agency means results fall. I'm not aware of any of that kind of evidence, but it takes us back to where we began, I think, in the first episode. In a way, it's like, why do you want to give children more agency? It's not just about, yes, we think they will definitely learn more because they will learn different things. Whether their outcomes in terms of test scores will go up, there's no conclusive evidence on that, but there's plenty of positive evidence. So I'd say do it. And
obviously, if you're, well, I say obviously, maybe I don't mean obviously, if a child has agency within a school, they're gonna enjoy learning.
Yeah,
they're gonna enjoy learning more, I would hope. And maybe that in itself leads to all the other stuff about test scores and going to further education, studying certain things, because I doubt anyone, well, I'm sure they do, but we're better at doing stuff when we're intrinsically motivated because we enjoy it. And sometimes something I've really learned as an adult is like learning is a joy in itself rather than a joy with an outcome. And what we're saying is like given child agency is maybe allowing them to become like learners rather than just I have learned this today, I've learned this, I enjoyed the process of learning. Is that something you found talking to the students that you work with, of when they are given agency, they just be like they're more excited about the whole process of school?
Absolutely. This is
there was a lot of nodding there, listeners. I'll say that the silence there was just due to sheer amount of nodding.
Oh, sorry, Arthur, we were thinking.
Excellent. It's because I gave everyone agency on this pod. Kind of.
I actually think it's a very quick answer from us, because that's exactly what children told us. And this is the point we briefly made in the first episode, where we made a distinction between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation, which would be linked to assessment and performing well on tests and achieving all sorts of life outcomes you're supposed to achieve. Whereas intrinsic motivation is where you enjoy learning. You're because you're learning what you want to learn about, and this is exactly what children in this school told us, that, oh, I know I'm going to be learning about this term or this term or maybe next term, but I'm looking forward to it. So children actually looking forward to school is what we feel it needs to be. It needs to be the case that children enjoy the experience that they get in school and not just work through the school to achieve a certain outcome at the end of it. And we didn't have in the project, we didn't have many parents to talk to. That wasn't part of the design, but we got to talk to some parents. And what they told us when we asked about what is your child's experience in school, the parents would tell us, oh, they love the school. My child loves his school or loves her school. So when they come home and they have a piece of homework, it's not, they don't have to be forced into it. They love the process of learning. They would create topic books based on each term, what they learned about in each term. And they would include into the topics, they were called topic books. These were collections of highlights from their learning, what they enjoyed most about learning in school that specific term. And those would be their own creations, which would reflect the joy of the process, because that would be what they actually loved to learn about. So yeah, absolutely. The point you said is exactly what we heard from children.
But it also reminds me of like what a universal kind of part of education is, how happy are children at school. And you ask parents time and time again, survey after survey, what do they most want? They most want their child to be happy at school. It's not all that they want. And that's not a superficial thing, and it's not an easy thing to achieve. And so, yes, of course, we want children to be motivated and to enjoy school for that reason alone. There is evidence, as we've said, that more motivated children, young people achieve more. Absolutely agree, Arthur, with your reflections on our own intrinsic motivation for learning and how we feel. This is relevant, isn't it? How we're still learning. All good teachers are still learning. And are all teachers? I remember when I was a teacher being genuinely excited by, I would go along to hear a speaker talking about education and thinking, right, what those ideas are fantastic. I want to try them in my classroom. I wonder if that spirit of teacher agency, enthusiasm for learning agentically. So it doesn't mean, of course, going to the required DFE course to learn how to do the latest thing they prescribe. That's very different. So I think in all levels of the system, agency needs to be a much more dominant part. I mean, we've worked with other colleagues have specialized more in teacher agency, but I think what we're bringing to the table in a new way through our research is all about pupils' agency, children's agency, students' agency,
which is going to be linked to the teachers. Once the system creates agency, then it starts to get really exciting. So just to take you back to your study, we spoke about at the start of this pod and last pod, we were saying, does the curriculum suppress child agency? And you were finding yes. But the second part, Yana, was, is it possible to create agency within those constraints? So what's the answer to that second question? Because I feel that's a nice way to kind of round up everything we've been talking about.
So the examples that we've given, they were in the context of a school following the national curriculum. So those amazing examples come from that specific environment where the national curriculum needs to be followed. It is being followed, but yet children have that meaningful choices that they make in their learning. They have a sense of making a difference to their learning which again highlights that the sense of agency is being instilled in them and they enjoy their learning. So all of that happens within the constraints of the national curriculum. It takes effort on the part of the teachers, and the senior leadership team acknowledge the amount of effort and thinking and planning that goes into this. So this is not something spontaneous. It needs to be carefully crafted, but it's possible.
Yeah, and I think also what we bring in the research is we have two state schools where they achieve very different things. Both I would regard as, you know, doing fantastic work with children in very different circumstances. Both absolutely committed to children's education, but one we felt experienced many more challenges as they saw it in getting children's agency alive in the curriculum than the other. and those reasons are really, even we couldn't get to the bottom of in some ways, because these are about the dynamics of lots of people, systems, people, histories, culture. But what we do is show how different schools respond, and we're hoping to. We're not there yet because we're well on the writing of a book, but we're thinking a lot about how we could perhaps portray agency in different levels, if you like, in different schools. You know, and we don't want a kind of crude ladder, but also it'd be good if we can find a way to sort of, in simple terms, show what are the things at different levels that seem to enhance children's agency, and what are they like? So that means that other schools will be able to look at this and go, okay, well, here's where we think we are. We want to go further, and we've got examples of what we can do and what we need to think about.
And that book's coming out in a couple of years, right?
Well, I'm afraid we have to deliver it by the end of this year. So then it takes about 6 months to get into print. So
so there's another cliffhanger for everyone for that. But in the meantime, Dominic, just as we come to kind of wrap up this whole conversation, which has been fascinating across the two pods, like I've got so many notes, and the questions are kind of about me as a teacher in the classroom, but also me as a teacher within my school, but also as me as a teacher within the education system and therefore kind of society. And I think they're all really important questions for us to ask ourselves. And if we come full circle to talk about is there opportunities for child agency? Well, if we're talking to teachers, you can create those opportunities because you, to some extent, have that agency within your classroom. Like you have that autonomy to create agency to like kind of pass on to your students. And that's how things start to change, when we make little differences in our own sphere of influence, and then those spheres kind of come together. And that's what you said. Maybe that thing you spoke about with the 6 bringing in objects, that probably started in one teacher's head in the staff room and then spoke about, and they tried it in the classroom, and it kind of organically grew. That's how these great ideas kind of come about. So it's been fascinating talking to you both about these. And I think this episode is going to give lots of people some pause to thought to go away and think about kind of their own thoughts on what we've been discussing, how they can bring it to their classroom. If someone is all about child agency, they're like, yep, I want to learn more about this. Is there anywhere we can go, any blogs, posts, anywhere we can kind of direct them to, Dom and Yana?
Oh yeah. We've done, there are blog posts that we've done around the project and about our work. Our own Helen Hamlyn Centre for Pedagogy website has some links there, and we'll obviously let you know and make those available to listeners.
Yeah, we have a range of outputs, some of which are designed to be accessible for general public and not just boring academics, including I'm reminded now, we actually have a short clip on YouTube. So we'll provide a link to that as well, which is about children's agency.
Excellent. So
indeed.
You two weren't boring. I'll point that out. I can't talk about your colleagues, but you two definitely were not boring.
There are exceptions that prove the rule.
If anyone's wondering about those links, if you go to the episode notes, all the links will be there for what your Yana and Dom are kind of referencing there. So keep an eye out for the book that's going to be coming out, but really go away and ask yourself those really big questions about child agency, because it's been a brilliant conversation. Thank you so much, Dom and Yana, for your time across both the episodes of Tea and Teaching. You're now what we would call Tea and Teaching regulars, because you've been on more than one pod. So you go into the big hall of fame that definitely only exists on our Excel spreadsheet, but it exists nonetheless. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
I love a spreadsheet.
No. Listeners, I'll be back in a moment. Well, thank you to Dominic and Yana for their time on those 2 episodes of Tea and Teaching. So much to take away there and really think about what it means for us as educators. For me, there was just so much discussion about the big topics of what we want education to be, but also what it means for us within our classroom and our own setting as teachers. And I really like the example of where we're talking about strategies and structures that we all recognize, and then really making a conscious effort to kind of involve a bit of child agency in that. I think that's a really important thing to take away and discuss. And I think this episode could lead to some brilliant conversations in your staff room, in your corridors, when you're discussing education over a cup of tea, which is what we're all about at Tea and Teaching. So please get in touch with us and share your thoughts. You can find us on Twitter at Tea and Teaching. But mainly, thank you to Dominic and to Yana for their time. What an awesome conversation. I've come away with so much to think about. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on Tea and Teaching. Thank you for listening to this episode of Tea and Teaching.
If you've enjoyed the content of this episode, please feel free to share it with other educators.
And if you're able to, please leave a review on the platform.
And as always, thank you for listening to Tea and Teaching.